Hello and welcome to TeachTalk, a project of creative universities. Today I'm talking to Dr. Su-Ming Khoo at the National University in Galway, Ireland, where she teaches in the Department of Political Science and Sociology. Hi Su-Ming, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi Anka, it's nice to meet you.
My first question is, can you give us just some brief background about yourself and who, where, and what do you teach?
Okay, so I'm Su-Ming Khoo. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Political Science and Sociology at the National University of Ireland, Galway. I'm a sociologist, but I teach very widely in inter and transdisciplinary courses. And I teach every level at the university, from introductory sociology to first year students, to a large final year undergraduate course in development studies, critical development studies, to quite a number of inter and transdisciplinary master's courses in in politics and society, in culture and colonialism, in public advocacy and activism, and in gender, globalization, and human rights. And I also teach and mentor PhD students. I'm the director of PhD studies in our school, and also postdoctoral researchers, early career researchers. So yeah, teaching is quite a broad portfolio for me.
So then my next question is this idea of critical creative teaching or pedagogy, which is at the heart of the Creative Universities project. How do you think about that, and how does it kind of relate to your own pedagogical practice?
That's a great question, Anki, and actually a very difficult one. So for me, critical, creative, and pedagogy are all linked ideas, which are deeply linked to the question of what education is, and how do we go about it, and what it's actually for. So I would broadly situate critical creative pedagogy within learning, thinking, being with, and trying to be a person, a citizen in a democratic society, which is always about the society being organized in a less inclusive way than we would like, and always being organized in, let's say, a somewhat unsatisfactory way. So critical creative pedagogy is about being with this lack of satisfaction and some sense of being committed to widening the democracy to include what it should have included in the first place, but somehow failed. And so therefore it requires a certain kind of being angry or being disappointed with this lack of inclusiveness and lack of reality. You could say that democracy and reality don't seem to be the same thing. Yeah, so a sense of kind of dissatisfaction or disenchantment, but this disenchantment is still linked to a sense of hope or optimism, that we still want to learn, that we will get something from learning, that will make us into a different person who will be different after whatever it is that we've learned. And part of that learning is being with other people in the world. And in a way, it's about not being alone in the world and being with others and trying to make sense of one's life in such a way. So I'm sorry if it seems very abstract way of talking about it. But so I think that critical creative pedagogy is about being an educator, thinking about what is education for, and how do we go about it with what we think it's for, and linking that all into being a person in the world and what it is that we can do. Well, what I do specifically is as an educator, but as a person, as a citizen, as someone who is dissatisfied and needs to live with other people.
what are some concrete examples of how you actually do this teaching in your classrooms and how your students are learning from those?
Okay, so it's quite difficult because I've got so many different courses and like really lots of different ideas about how to go about them in very concrete ways. But what I've done this year and since the beginning of the pandemic is this kind of very simple route map to all the courses. And they use the metaphor of planting and harvesting. So they use these kind of like a agricultural or plant-based kind of metaphors. So the first starting point is finding the seeds. So the seeds are the course outline, the course description gives a set of questions, problems, topic, and subject matter, which is organized in a certain way and offers certain questions that might be worth asking. So these are the seeds. But the questions don't belong to me, the educator, they belong to the student whose ownership, only happens when they decide to choose those seeds and also to plant them. So planting the seeds is about reading and writing and talking and sharing and becoming part of a community of people interested in such questions. So I have this metaphor then that every subject matter is kind of part of a set of fields. And we plant those seeds, the questions, in fields which have similar sorts of questions growing alongside each other, or they may even be the same question growing in the same field. Yeah, but each plant is different, if you like, yeah, and may grow in a similar sort of way, but it's the intention of the learner who plants that seed. And that seed is nourished by the conversation and the reading. So reading is a very important creative, critical activity whereby we take on what others have written and said. We try and imagine why they wrote that, and at the same time examine our reading intention of why we would be interested in reading such a thing. And then the next stage, I think, from the field, it's to the table. That the idea is that we come around a table. This is a sort of metaphorical table. It's not a real table, especially because of this online teaching thing. But it's this idea that everybody brings something to talk about. And the ideal kind of meal around the table, gathering around the table, is when we have something to nourish each other, to share with each other, to talk about. It's not just about eating the food, right? It's about meeting the people and sharing, breaking bread with them. This idea of a community, a learning community. And this word community relates to the Latin for coming around a table, communis. So this idea of trying to create this table for the class is like this. I think it's like laying a really nice feast, and people are going to bring their dishes, and we're going to share and talk and eat. That's the way I think about it in my mind. And also there's a thing that students do individually, which is writing and developing the skills to write. And I see this as through the metaphor of harvesting, that all those seeds that they planted would be harvested and processed in some way into a form which is understandable to other people. And from there, they complete a sort of journey from being readers and talkers about things to writers and creators of thoughts.
I love your organic metaphors of the field and the seeds and planting and nourishing and the journey and again, eating is such a multisensorial activity, right? For me, it comes back, you talk about reading and and writing, but there's so much more to learning, which I think this idea of sharing a feast, bringing a feast, sharing a feast captures so well. So I think that's a fantastic metaphor. Now you also do some teaching around activism, do I remember correctly?
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about that? Because that's
sure.
a particular
Okay,
area.
so it's actually a very traditional sociology course. It's called the Social and Political Context of Public Advocacy and Activism. And it's offered as a elective course on the Masters of Public Advocacy and Activism, and which is a master's course that I was involved in designing. So one of the questions that we had at the very beginning of designing this course and deciding whether we should offer this master's program or not was, well, why would people want to do a course on this? They were already activists, because we had done a lot of market research, and we knew that a lot of people who were interested in taking this course were not preparing to become activists in the future as such. So it was not about learning how to become an activist. They were mainly people who were already activists and needed something. Often an antidote to burnout, or something that would help them to grow personally or deal with issues personally, or to develop and re-enter their organization at a higher level. So this was also something that people had in their mind. So this idea of a space that they could step into to reflect on what activism was all about, and also giving them a lot more kind of academic and scholarly knowledge about the world of activism. So it's an international course, which is about the world of activism on the international level. And it begins with slavery abolition. And it goes through quite a number of different topics: the environment, women's rights, global health activism, and topics that I have an interest in teaching, basically. And the core thing that all the students do is they have to kind of read the syllabus, which is really a history of international global activism, focusing on sort of different historical contexts and geographical contexts, different actors in activism. Who are these different actors? Different tools and approaches that are used in advocacy, and a space to talk about the contradictions and dilemmas of advocacy and activism. And what every student does is develop their individual case study, which they do throughout the course, and to collaborate with the other people in the class to think comparatively and in parallel about, who is this activism all about? Where did it come from? What did they actually do? Did it work or not? And what were the dilemmas and the issues that were really thorny, and to have a space to discuss those.
Yeah, in addition to reading, do I remember correctly, you also have playlists, music and videos? Do I remember that correctly in terms of?
Yeah, well, that's the thing I started during the lockdown, really, was just to curate a playlist as a way, because I didn't know how difficult it would be for people to engage with the course material, which is often heavy. Mm-hmm. We are dealing with, slavery and people dying of diseases and things like that. Then, the environment, the sixth extinction. I mean, it's very heavy material. So, and, people have their challenges as well when they're signing up for a master's like this. Some are in busy jobs, some, are dealing with personal circumstances. So it was just to give everyone a kind of a gift of something, I suppose, and also for fun. So just curating a little playlist that could get people into the topic in a slightly different way. So in a way, this relates back to this idea of creative and critical through a sort of side door. It's not exactly the front door. It's not exactly the back door, but it's kind of like a side door. So I'm quite interested in this, approaching things from a sideways. So even when I'm doing the quite conventional theory course, I was offered this kind of sideways, kind of slightly kooky reading of the topic seen from a very unexpected perspective. So the music is both expected and unexpected, and music creates understanding, which is effective, embodied, and it's also frequently humorous and joyful. So it can, it's a great way of delivering on the mixture of emotions and ideas and the complexity, because music is a form that helps people understand complexity in a very easily comprehended way. It uses these other capacities we have for understanding, like besides lyrics. Lyrics, of course, activate the poetic imagination. So they're really great for getting at this critical ability of people to find the right words, because that's what poetry does. Poetry is the art of finding the right words. So it brings artfulness into the making of meaning, poesis. Rhythm then helps people move on. And, when you have a piece of music, it moves people on in time and they're not stuck. And it gives people a kind of a grammar for understanding, because music has a sort of a repetitive format, or a kind of a pre-understandable, grammatical format. We know that, and we also know that it's not going to go on for too long. Yeah, the maximum the song, and I give them warning. Some of the songs are long, and some of you have to listen to this jazz for 8 minutes, but that's okay. People are okay with being told to listen to jazz for 8 minutes, and they don't have to listen to it. So it's that, and also I think it does tap into this idea then that they can be creative and they can be a little bit lighthearted and humorous, and it's also a great place for channeling emotions and giving a very safe way of expressing emotions. So I have quite a lot of angry music, for example, quite a lot of cross music, bad music about bad things, as well as very haunting and beautiful music about difficult and appalling things, which could not be expressed just by writing those words boldly on a page, because we're dealing with things that are very personal, intimate, and difficult for people.